This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Are the Browns going to force a new head coach hire to keep Jim Schwartz? Look, I say this every time the Browns have any coach hiring opening, whether it be offensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, defensive coordinator. Get really ready to hear a lot of stuff that you're going to probably forget in a month or two because it feels like a moot point. I tend to believe that this is going to be one of those things that we're going to file under this category that people got really worked up about for not real reasons. And here's what I mean by that. Do I think the Browns would be interested in retaining Jim Schwartz in certain situations? Yes. Do I think the Browns would force every coach they interview, regardless of background, regardless of leverage, to try to keep Jim Schwartz? No, I don't think that's even remotely the case. And I think it's pretty obvious that's not the case when you look at some of the coaches that they've brought in to interview. Like, they've brought in people with defensive backgrounds to interview for this job. The assumption being that those people would not be forced to keep Jim Schwartz if the Browns went in that direction. There's other reasons why I think that this report is being kind of overreacted to. And people are just kind of doing that thing where like it's like rage bait and they just get their hot, angry takes off on it. And this is like the latest vessel to do that with. But real quick, let me thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. At Jesse Minter, they looked at Aiden Dourde. Those are two defensive coordinators who you would assume would not be bringing in Jim Schwartz. You have to assume if John came in, maybe you would consider Jim Schwartz, but there's really no connection there that would make you feel like that is likely. What I think this report stems from is something that makes a lot of sense, which is the Browns would recommend Jim Schwartz to a head coach who takes this job. Like if you take the job and you're like, hey, who do you feel like I should consider for the coordinating position for the defensive side of the ball? The Browns will happily suggest Jim Schwartz in situations where that makes sense. Let's say they hired, if we're just looking at the list of people they brought in, right? If they hired Mike McDaniel, you would probably suggest Jim Schwartz so that Mike could focus on the offensive side of the ball. Tommy Reese would only be hired if you bring back Jim Schwartz. Dan Pitcher, right? You know, maybe that's something they do. Todd Monken, maybe that's something you do there, right? But the idea that like, hey, it's mandatory, I think is the overblown part of this. I think that they will have a choice in whether they bring in Jim Schwartz or not. And I'm gonna be real with you. I don't even think it's that bad of a thing if they were looking at some guys and saying, hey, look, we're gonna want you to hire Jim Schwartz if we bring you in. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think that's organizational support in some instances, right? Like if you hire a Dan Pitcher who doesn't have a ton of experience as a coach, has only called plays for like a portion of the 2024 season in Cincinnati. Yeah, you might want him to have Jim Schwartz on the staff, who's a veteran, former head coach, who can help you bring things together. If you are Mike McDaniel, who struggled with keeping the locker room together, I think Jim Schwartz is a very useful hand to have because Jim Schwartz seems to be pretty good at keeping teams together. So, yeah, I think it can make sense if you're asking Mike McDaniel, hey, what do you think of Jim Schwartz taking this job and presenting that to him as something that you would want to do? I don't think that's the most insane thing in the world. I really don't think it's the most insane thing in the world, right? I get that it might, take you out. Like Mike McDaniel might not like that, and it takes him out of wanting the job. But if that's what it takes to get Mike McDaniel out of wanting the Browns job, then I think I'm good on the idea of hiring Mike McDaniel. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like some of these guys aren't as attractive of names to bring in if you don't have that kind of veteran presence behind them that a Jim Schwartz could provide. If you bring in a Dan Pitcher and he wants to bring in one of his friends who's inexperienced to run the defense and he's already inexperienced at head coach, I don't know if I'm excited about that. But if you bring in Dan Pitcher and he's like, okay, I'm going to bring in Jim Schwartz, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's not like Jim Schwartz is like Kevin Stefanski's guy, right? I think that's the perception that people have on it. If this were a situation, let's say the only way this would be kind of toxic is if this was still like Joe Woods, right? Let's imagine a world. I know it's a hilarious thing to try to imagine. But let's imagine a world where Joe Woods isn't terrible at his job. Joe Woods is actually really good at his job, and he coaches a good defense to the point to where the Browns are what they are today. If the Browns were saying, we're going to fire Kevin Stefanski, keep Joe Woods, and force the next team to keep Joe Woods, I would say that's a problem, right? That's a massive problem because Joe Woods is Kevin Stefanski's guy. Jim Schwartz is not Kevin Stefanski's guy. He's not coming from the Kevin Stefanski tree. He's Jim Schwartz. He's been a mercenary defensive coordinator hire for like the last 10 years since he's lost a job with the Lions. So again, it's not like they're going to have this loyalty to Jim Schwartz / Kevin Stefanski by keeping Jim Schwartz there. He's Jim Schwartz. Like, he's kind of his own entity at this point. You would have him run most of the defense. He would help out. Like Jim's bounced around a couple of times now. He knows how to deal with this. Again, if this were somebody who was more associated with Kevin Stefanski, I would 100% get it. I would 100% get why people would be inherently against anything like this. But that's not what Jim Schwartz is. Jim Schwartz is just a dude who coached with Kevin for a couple of years. He's not under Kevin's wing. He's not a Kevin Stefanski guy. He's just a guy who coaches a lot in the NFL, defensive coordinator. He's kind of his own thing, right? Like similar to Spagnuolo out there in Kansas City. He's his own entity. He's one of those coaches that you can keep on the roster because he doesn't have overbearing loyalties to anybody on the previous staff. He's his own man. So I don't think that this is a inherently bad idea to the way that people are painting it. I think it makes sense for some of the names that they're bringing in. And let's say like the Browns want to bring in Grant Udesky, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. If you have his pronunciation guide, please leave it in the comment section. From the Jaguars, right? The Jaguars offensive coordinator. The Browns are bringing that guy in. He's 30 years old, only been an offensive coordinator for 1 year, but he is well thought of amongst coaches. So highly thought of that he could become the coach at 30 years old. Well, if you hire him, one thing he's not going to come with is a wide network of people to be able to have a vast net. Hold on. I tried to, but I got to get her out of here. Hold on. Give me 1 second, y'all. You got anything to say? Who should the Browns hire? Okay. All right. You didn't want to talk. You got attitude. I apologize for my rowdy co-host there, but let's go and say you hired he's my age. You hired the guy from Jacksonville, right? 30-year-old hotshot head coach candidate. Since he is so young, he's not going to come with a ton of connections to fill in these roles at head coach. offensive coordinator, linebacker coach, right? He doesn't have a wide network yet built up of people he can bring in. So he's going to have to lean on the organization to fill in some of these gaps because the organization has the connections. Andrew Berry has the connections, not really Grant. So hiring Jim Schwartz and maintaining most of your defensive staff would make a giant amount of success. I mean, not success, a giant amount of difference in that situation. Hell, I think it could make the job more attractive to Grant because it's not going to be seen as some overbearing upgrade for him going from coordinator to head coach. It's going to be seen as something where it's like, hey, this is manageable because they do have Jim Schwartz there. I get it. Whenever the Browns do anything, people paint it as bad news. Okay, it's been like that for a few years now. And there's benefits to doing it that way because the Browns don't tend to produce enough good results to stop people from doing it that way. I get it. I truly do. But I think the Jim Schwartz thing, if you actually think about it for more than like 1 minute, that makes sense. I don't think it's some disaster. I don't think it's some terrible idea. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of the candidates that the Cleveland Browns are looking at. And if the Browns are being self-aware about this head coaching search and they know that they're not the most attractive option, then keeping that bridge built with Jim Schwartz to take a defensive coordinator job for a less experienced head coach, I think makes sense. Now, some people might feel like Jim Schwartz will feel slighted because he doesn't get the head coaching job. But if Jim Schwartz comes back as defensive coordinator, it's because nobody offered him a head coaching job. So it's not just the Browns, right? The Ravens interviewed him. They're not going to offer him. So we talked about why it makes sense for some of the people that they're bringing in for Jim Schwartz to be seriously considered for the defensive coordinator position, right? I think there is a conversation to be had about the relationship Jim Schwartz will have with the organization if they do not make him the head coach, but do bring in somebody else. Again, like I said before the break, I think Jim Schwartz is professional enough to handle that. I think he's not like a 35-year-old who doesn't know how the NFL works. He knows that the league's a business. He knows that the league's going to always lean towards the younger guys, the offensive guys, the guys who have upside, and he's viewed as an older guy. He knows what it is, right? So I don't think Jim Schwartz is going to ego his way out of this Browns job. And ultimately, if you're Jim Schwartz and you don't get a head coaching job and you are looking for a defensive coordinating job, where are you going to find a better defensive coordinating job than Cleveland? That's the leverage that they have on Jim Schwartz and why it is that I think they will be able to retain him despite the fact that they're not going to make him head coach this cycle, right? He will be able to take the best defensive coordinating job on the market. There is not a job that is better than Cleveland for a defensive coordinator. They have the best defensive player in football. They have invested heavily in the defensive line. They have a strong front seven, strong corners. And hey, Jim, you're already super familiar with these guys. You've already built a great defense. This would be the best job for Jim Schwartz to take by far. So I think that's the leverage that Cleveland's ultimately going to have. The Browns aren't going to have a hard time finding a defensive coordinator. I'm going to bust that bubble here, right? They wanted to keep Jim Schwartz. They didn't want to keep Jim Schwartz. They're going to be able to find somebody to be the defensive coordinator of this team because, again, the Browns don't have a quarterback on the offensive side of the ball, but on the defensive side of the ball, they have the equivalent of a quarterback, right? Every defensive coordinator who's available to take a job will take that job because Myles Garrett is there. So that's not really that big of a concern of mine, whether you keep Jim Schwartz or not. I think it makes sense in certain situations, especially if you go with somebody who's inexperienced or somebody like Mike McDaniel, whose experience left some holes to be filled, and you think Jim can help him fill those holes. I think that makes sense. I think Jim is enough of an entity on his own that he doesn't run the risk of being a Stefanski guy, right? I think he's his own entity at this point. And honestly, he's more of a Andrew Berry guy than a Kevin Stefanski guy because Andrew Berry led the drive to bring in Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator with his ties in Philadelphia. So that's where we are with the whole coaching search, right? The Browns are bringing in some names, mainly some up-and-comers, some interesting names on that up-and-comer list. There is the big elephant in the room, the John Harbaugh-sized elephant in the room. I'll talk about that tomorrow morning. But that's where the Browns search is. That's where everything is lying. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think the Browns should force these up and comers that they have in the building, well, not in the building, but that they're interviewing to consider Jim Schwartz? Do you think that keeping Jim Schwartz is a bad idea? Do you think you have to make Jim Schwartz the head coach? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. You guys have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.